My name is Olivia Carter, and I was 28 years old when I walked back into my father's house carrying a single black folder. Inside that folder was enough evidence to destroy the woman who had spent 12 years convincing my family that I was a liar. For over a decade, my stepmother had turned everyone against me. That night, she smiled when she saw me. By the end of the evening, she was begging people to believe her. Before we get into this story, if you've ever dealt with betrayal, manipulation, or someone who convinced everyone around you that you were the villain, make sure to like the video and subscribe. Stories like this remind us that the truth has a strange way of surviving, even when someone spends years trying to bury it. Now let me tell you how my stepmother stole my family, and how I finally got them back. I was 11 years old when my mother died. Even now, years later, I can still remember the smell of disinfectant in the hospital hallways, the fluorescent lights, the constant beeping machines, the way adults lowered their voices whenever they thought I was close enough to hear. Nobody ever tells a child exactly what's happening. They think they're protecting you. What they're really doing is forcing you to piece together a nightmare from fragments. I knew my mother was sick. I knew my father cried when he thought nobody was looking. And I knew one day I went to school with a mother and came home without one. That was the day everything changed. For a while, it was just me and Dad. We struggled. Neither of us knew how to exist without her. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too empty. Like someone had taken the heart out of it. Dad tried. I want to be fair about that. He really did. He learned how to braid my hair by watching videos. He burned dinners and ordered pizza. He forgot school forms and dentist appointments. But he tried. And for a while, that was enough. Then he met Vanessa. At first, I actually liked her. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this story. People assume I hated her from the beginning. I didn't. She was charming, funny, beautiful. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately become the center of attention. She remembered birthdays, brought gifts, asked questions, smiled constantly. Everyone loved Vanessa, including me. At first. The warning signs were tiny, so tiny that nobody noticed them except me, and I was 12. Who listens to a 12-year-old? The first thing she did was move my mother's photographs. Not remove them. Move them. Just enough to make them less visible. One picture disappeared from the hallway, another moved from the living room shelf. Another ended up in Dad's office. When I asked why, she'd smile. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just redecorating." Sweetheart. She always called me sweetheart, the way some people use honey to cover poison. Then she started correcting my memories. "Your mother actually hated gardening." "No, she didn't." "Your mom wasn't very organized." "Yes, she was." "Your mother struggled with money." "No, she didn't." Small things, little revisions, tiny edits to history, each one harmless by itself. Together? They felt wrong, like someone quietly rewriting a book while I was still reading it. Dad never noticed. Or maybe he didn't want to. He was happy again. And after losing Mom, happiness probably felt too precious to question. They got married when I was 13. That's when everything accelerated. Vanessa stopped pretending. Not completely. Only when nobody else was around. The first time it happened, I thought I'd imagined it. We were washing dishes. Dad was outside mowing the lawn. Vanessa looked at me and said, "You know, your father only worries about you because he feels guilty." I blinked. "What?" He wouldn't admit it, of course. She dried a plate. Calm, casual. "He thinks he failed your mother." Something cold settled in my stomach. "Why are you saying that?" She smiled, that same perfect smile. "I'm just helping you understand adults." Then she walked away, leaving me standing there confused. Months later came another comment, then another, then another. Always subtle, always impossible to prove. You can be difficult sometimes. People get tired of drama. Your father needs peace. You should be grateful. Each sentence sounded reasonable until you heard them every week, every month, every year. Eventually, they stopped feeling like observations. They started feeling like instructions. The real damage began when she learned how to weaponize perception. If I got upset, I was emotional. If I defended myself, I was disrespectful. If I stayed quiet, I was sulking. Every possible reaction became evidence against me. And slowly, unbelievably, people started believing her, including my father. I remember one specific night. I was 15. Dad accused me of breaking an expensive vase. I hadn't touched it. Vanessa claimed she'd seen me near it. That was all it took. No proof. No discussion. Case closed. I was grounded for 2 weeks. I cried in my room that night. Not because of the punishment, because Dad never asked for my side. That hurt more. Years passed. The pattern repeated. Again, and again, and again. Every conflict somehow became my fault. Every misunderstanding benefited Vanessa. Every argument left me looking worse. I started doubting myself. That's the terrifying thing about long-term manipulation. Eventually, you stop asking whether they're lying. You start asking whether you're crazy. By 17, my relationship with Dad was hanging by a thread. Vanessa stood between us like an invisible wall. Whenever I tried talking to him, she'd somehow appear. Whenever we had a disagreement, she'd become the interpreter. Whenever I expressed frustration, she'd reframe it. By the end of every conversation, Dad wasn't hearing me anymore. He was hearing her version of me, and her version was awful. The final blow came 6 months before I left for college. Dad called me into his office. Vanessa was sitting beside him. I already knew that was a bad sign. Neither of them looked happy. Dad folded his hands. "Olivia, we need to talk." My stomach dropped. I had no idea that conversation would change everything, and what happened next would push me out of the family completely. But I still had no idea that Vanessa's biggest mistake had already happened, and years later, that mistake would become the weapon that destroyed her. Dad's office had always been my favorite room in the house. When I was little, I'd sit on the floor while he worked and draw pictures. He'd glance down every few minutes and tell me how talented I was, even when my stick figures looked like they had survived a natural disaster. That room used to feel safe. That afternoon, it felt like a courtroom. And I was already convicted. The blinds were partially closed. The late afternoon sunlight cut across the room in thin golden stripes. Dust floated through the air. Vanessa sat beside my father with her hands folded neatly in her lap. Calm, collected, prepared. I should have recognized the look. It was the same expression she'd worn every time she was about to destroy someone while pretending she was helping them. Dad sighed heavily. "We've received some concerning information." Immediately, my stomach tightened. What information? Neither of them answered right away. Vanessa looked down as if she was uncomfortable. The performance had begun. Finally, Dad spoke. "Vanessa says you've been taking money from her purse." For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "What? You've been stealing?" The word hit me like a slap. "No." Dad leaned back. "Olivia." "No." I stood immediately. "I never stole anything." Vanessa sighed, the saddest, most disappointed sigh imaginable. I didn't want to believe it either. I looked at her. My pulse hammered in my ears. "You know that's not true." She looked heartbroken. Heartbroken. The woman deserved an Oscar. "I've tried to protect you." "Protect me." The audacity nearly made me laugh. Dad rubbed his forehead. "Money has gone missing multiple times." So? So Vanessa saw you near her purse. There it was. Again. Near. Always near. Never actually doing anything. just conveniently positioned close enough for her accusations. I stared at my father, waiting, waiting for him to realize how ridiculous this was, waiting for him to ask a follow-up question, waiting for him to be my father. Instead, he looked disappointed, deeply disappointed, and somehow that hurt more than anger ever could. I felt something crack inside me, not dramatically, not all at once, just a tiny fracture, the beginning of something breaking. I didn't take anything. Dad nodded slowly, the way people nod when they think you're lying. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. Nothing I said mattered. Every explanation became an excuse. Every denial became evidence. By the time I left the room, I knew I'd already lost. The verdict had been decided before I walked in. Vanessa didn't need proof. She only needed suspicion. And she had become an expert at creating it. A month later, another accusation appeared. Then another. Then another. Missing jewelry. Disrespectful comments. Broken items. Lies. Always lies. I wasn't just becoming the family problem. I was becoming the family disappointment. Relatives started treating me differently. Subtly. The way adults do when they think a teenager is troubled. They became cautious around me. Measured. Polite. Concerned. Concerned was the worst. I hated concerned. Concern meant they'd already accepted Vanessa's narrative. I was no longer Olivia. I was Olivia, the difficult daughter. Olivia, the troubled teenager. Olivia, the girl her poor stepmother tried so hard to help. The loneliness was suffocating. Have you ever been surrounded by people and still felt completely alone? It's a strange feeling, like screaming underwater. You know nobody can hear you, but you keep trying anyway, because the alternative is giving up. By the time I graduated high school, I was exhausted. Emotionally exhausted, mentally exhausted, physically exhausted. Living in that house felt like living under constant surveillance. Every word, every action, every mistake, everything became ammunition. College became my escape plan, my lifeline, my chance to breathe again. The day I left, Dad hugged me. Vanessa cried. Actual tears. Watching her fake sadness was almost impressive. She wrapped her arms around me. I'm so proud of you. I nearly laughed. Instead, I hugged her back. Because arguing never worked. Nothing worked. As Dad loaded the last box into my car, I looked at the house one final time. I remember thinking, maybe distance will fix this. Maybe once I'm gone, things will improve. Maybe Dad will see who she really is. I was wrong. Very wrong. College should have been the happiest time of my life. Instead, it became the period when I slowly realized how completely Vanessa had poisoned everything. At first, calls from home became less frequent, then shorter, then colder. Dad sounded distracted, detached. Conversations felt forced. Whenever I asked how things were going, Vanessa somehow ended up on the phone. Every time, like a gatekeeper, a filter, a translator. I couldn't reach him directly anymore. Eventually, holidays became uncomfortable, then painful, then unbearable. Every visit home felt like entering hostile territory. The family dynamic had shifted completely. Vanessa occupied the center, I orbited the edges, and somehow everyone acted like that was normal. One Thanksgiving stands out vividly. I was 21. The dining room was packed with relatives. Laughter, conversation, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon. Everything looked perfect, from the outside. Then my aunt casually mentioned a story, something I'd supposedly done. I froze, because it never happened, not even remotely. According to the story, I'd gotten drunk at a family event and screamed at relatives. The room laughed. People shook their heads. Oh, Olivia. I sat there stunned. Where did this come from? Then I noticed Vanessa smiling. Not broadly, not obviously, Just enough. Tiny. Satisfied. Suddenly I understood. The lies had evolved. They were spreading now. Growing. Developing lives of their own. And worse? People believed them. Because why wouldn't they? Vanessa had spent years building credibility. Years crafting her image. The devoted wife. The patient stepmother. The peacemaker. I was competing against a reputation she'd carefully constructed brick by brick. And I was losing. Badly. The breaking point came when my grandmother died. That phone call arrived at 2:14 in the morning. I still remember checking the screen, seeing Dad's name, feeling dread immediately. Nobody calls at 2 a.m. with good news. By sunrise, I was driving home. My grandmother had been one of the last people who still listened to me. Not completely, not always, but enough. She occasionally questioned Vanessa, occasionally defended me, occasionally noticed things others missed. Now she was gone. The funeral was devastating. But the aftermath was worse. A few weeks later, family discussions began regarding inheritance. Nothing huge. Grandma wasn't wealthy, but there were sentimental items, jewelry, photographs, family heirlooms, memories, things that mattered. That's when I learned something shocking. Several relatives genuinely believed I only cared about money. Money. The accusation stunned me. Then I discovered where it originated. Vanessa. Of course. According to her, I'd been asking questions about inheritance for months. I hadn't. According to her, I'd complained about Grandma's financial decisions. I hadn't. According to her, I'd expressed disappointment about what I might receive. I definitely hadn't. Yet somehow the narrative spread. Again. And again. And again. I confronted Dad afterward. For the first time in years, I pushed back hard. We stood in the kitchen. The same kitchen where Vanessa had slowly dismantled my life. I remember my hands shaking. Dad, do you actually believe this stuff? His face hardened. What stuff? The things Vanessa says about me. Silence. A long silence. Then. Vanessa has never given me a reason not to trust her. The words hit harder than anything else. Not because of what he said. Because of what he didn't say. He didn't trust me. Not anymore. Maybe he hadn't for years. The realization physically hurt, like pressure on my chest, like something heavy crushing my lungs. I could barely breathe. I've spent years trying to tell you. Olivia. His voice became stern, warning, dismissive, final. I'm tired of this. Tired of this. As if I were the problem. As if defending myself were the problem. As if 12 years of manipulation were some annoying inconvenience. Something inside me finally snapped. Not anger, not rage. Something colder. Acceptance. I looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I understood something devastating. He wasn't going to save me. He wasn't going to figure it out. He wasn't going to wake up one day and suddenly see Vanessa clearly. Because believing her had become easier than questioning everything. Easier than admitting he'd failed. Easier than admitting he'd chosen the wrong person. So I stopped trying. That day, I walked away. Not dramatically. No shouting. No ultimatums. No movie scene. I simply left. And then I stayed gone. For the next several years, I built a life. A real life. I focused on work. Friends. My career. My future. I moved 3 states away. Started over. And gradually, the constant pain became manageable. Not gone. Never gone. But manageable. The family called less and less, then barely at all. Birthdays became text messages. Holidays became silence. Eventually, I wasn't really part of the family anymore. I existed on the edges, a distant relative in my own family tree. Sometimes I'd see photos online, Dad smiling, Vanessa hosting parties, family gatherings, celebrations. Everything looked perfect. Perfect. The word made me sick. Because I knew what was underneath. Or at least I thought I did. The truth was much worse. Far worse. Because while I was rebuilding my life, Vanessa was hiding secrets. Huge secrets. Secrets nobody suspected. Secrets buried beneath years of carefully constructed lies, and purely by accident. I was about to discover them. The discovery would begin with a single email. An email that arrived on a random Tuesday morning. An email from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. And by the time I finished reading it, I realized something incredible. For the first time in 12 years, Vanessa had made a mistake. A very, very expensive mistake. The email arrived at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I was running late for work. My coffee had gone cold. I was searching for my keys. And the notification almost got ignored. The sender's name stopped me. Rachel Morgan. For a moment I couldn't place it. Then it clicked. Rachel was Vanessa's younger sister, the black sheep of the family. At least according to Vanessa. Growing up, I'd heard endless stories about her. How irresponsible she was. How dramatic she was. How selfish she was. How nobody could trust her. Funny how people who spend their lives destroying reputations always accuse others of doing exactly that. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in almost 9 years. The subject line contained only 4 words. You deserve the truth. My stomach immediately tightened. I sat down, opened the email, and started reading. By the 3rd paragraph, my hands were shaking. By the 5th, I couldn't breathe. By the end, I understood that everything I thought I knew about Vanessa wasn't even half the story. Rachel's message was long, painfully detailed. She explained that she had spent years avoiding the family because of Vanessa. According to her, Vanessa had been manipulating people long before she met my father. Friends, boyfriends, co-workers, even relatives. The pattern was always the same. She'd isolate someone, control the narrative, position herself as the victim, then quietly destroy anyone who threatened her image. As I read, memories flooded back, the accusations, the misunderstandings, the endless rewriting of reality. Suddenly, it all fit, like pieces of a puzzle I'd been staring at for years. But the most shocking part came near the end. Rachel claimed she had proof. Actual proof. Documents, emails, messages, financial records, evidence, not rumors, not stories, evidence. My pulse hammered. I reread that section 3 times, then 4, then 5, because after spending years being called a liar, evidence felt almost mythical, too good to be true. I responded immediately. Within an hour, Rachel called me. The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. 3 hours that completely changed my understanding of my life. I sat at my kitchen table while she talked. Sometimes angry, sometimes emotional, sometimes eerily calm. The details were horrifying. Vanessa had lied to family members about each other, manufactured conflicts, created fake misunderstandings, manipulated finances, hidden debts, destroyed friendships, alienated relatives. The woman practically treated relationships like a chessboard. Everyone was a piece. Everyone was expendable, except herself. When Rachel finally finished, there was a long silence. Then she asked, "Do you know why I'm telling you this now?" "No." "Because she's gotten careless." Those words stayed with me. Careless. For years, Vanessa had operated like someone untouchable. Now, apparently, cracks were forming. Rachel explained that several relatives had quietly distanced themselves. Old lies were beginning to collide with newer lies. Stories weren't matching anymore. Questions were emerging. Nothing dramatic. Nothing public. But enough to make Vanessa nervous. Enough for mistakes. And mistakes create opportunities. That night, I barely slept. I kept pacing my apartment, replaying everything, Every accusation, every argument, every lost relationship. 12 years. 12 years of damage. 12 years of being painted as the villain. And suddenly, there was a possibility. Not certainty, not justice, but possibility. The possibility that I wasn't crazy. The possibility that someone else finally saw it too. The possibility that the truth existed somewhere outside my own memories. For the first time in years, hope returned. And hope can be dangerous, because once you have it, you start imagining outcomes. You start imagining accountability. You start imagining revenge. Over the next 2 months, Rachel began sending documents. Carefully, gradually, one batch at a time. Every package revealed something new, something worse. I felt like an investigator digging through the ruins of my own life. Emails between Vanessa and relatives. Messages where she intentionally misrepresented conversations. Evidence that she'd borrowed money from family members while blaming others. Proof she'd spread rumors she later denied starting. The sheer volume stunned me. But one discovery stood above all the others. One discovery changed everything. It happened on a rainy Thursday night. I was reviewing old files Rachel had scanned. Hours had passed. My eyes hurt, my neck ached. I almost stopped. Then I noticed a folder. Its label seemed ordinary, almost boring. Financial documents. I opened it. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Bank statements, credit records, loan applications. Then I saw my father's name. My entire body froze. I clicked. And suddenly the room felt very quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound loud. Very loud. I stared at the screen, then looked again, then zoomed in, then checked dates, then checked signatures, then checked everything again. Because what I was seeing couldn't possibly be real. Except it was. Vanessa had been secretly moving money, not enormous amounts. Not enough to trigger immediate suspicion, but enough. Over years. Thousands here, thousands there. Small transfers, hidden accounts, carefully disguised transactions. The pattern stretched back almost a decade. A decade. I sat there in complete disbelief. Then came another realization. This wasn't just manipulation. This wasn't just emotional abuse. This was fraud. Actual fraud. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. For 12 years, I'd imagined exposing Vanessa, confronting her, proving she lied. Now I was looking at something much bigger, something that could destroy her entire reputation, possibly more. The temptation to act immediately was overwhelming, but I didn't. And that decision changed everything. Because for the first time, I wasn't acting emotionally. I wasn't the angry daughter anymore. I wasn't the isolated victim. I wasn't the person Vanessa expected. I became patient, very patient. The next 6 months were the strangest period of my life. Outwardly, nothing changed. I went to work, saw friends, paid bills, lived normally. Internally, I was building a case. Every evening became research, verification, organization, cross-checking. I wanted certainty, absolute certainty. No mistakes, no assumptions, no holes. Because I understood something important. If I challenged Vanessa without airtight evidence, she'd do what she'd always done. She'd twist the story, play the victim, turn everyone against me. Again. I only had one shot. One. So I became meticulous. Dates, documents, witnesses, financial records, screenshots, emails, everything. The black folder began taking shape. At first it existed digitally, then physically, every piece of evidence printed, organized, indexed, labeled. I remember the strange satisfaction of sliding documents into plastic sleeves, the quiet thrill of preparation, like sharpening a blade after years of being hunted. Not because I enjoyed revenge, because I enjoyed finally having power. That's the difference people often miss. Revenge isn't always about hurting someone. Sometimes it's about reclaiming something they stole. And Vanessa had stolen a lot. My reputation, my relationship with my father, years of trust, years of peace, years of family. The folder wasn't just evidence, it was validation. Proof that I hadn't imagined everything. Proof that I wasn't the monster she'd created. Proof that reality still existed. Then came the invitation. The invitation that changed everything. My father's 60th birthday. A massive family gathering. Nearly everyone would attend. Relatives from multiple states. Family friends. Old acquaintances. People I hadn't seen in years. The invitation arrived by mail. Simple. Elegant. Ordinary. Yet the moment I saw it, I knew. This was the moment. The opportunity. The stage. The perfect setting. Not because I wanted a public spectacle, because Vanessa's reputation lived in public. She had spent years constructing it in front of everyone. If the truth remained private, she'd survive. She'd adapt. She'd lie. She'd recover. No. The truth needed witnesses. The same audience she'd manipulated. The same people she'd deceived. The same family she'd used as props. For weeks, I debated whether to attend. Fear kept resurfacing. What if it failed? What if nobody believed me? What if Dad chose her again? The possibility haunted me. Some nights I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence, questioning everything. But eventually another thought became stronger. A simple thought. If I walked away now, she'd win forever. And I couldn't live with that. Not anymore. So I accepted the invitation. Then I bought a plane ticket. Then I packed the folder. The black folder. The one that now contained 12 years of truth. The one that weighed almost nothing. And somehow felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. The flight home felt surreal. Every mile brought memories back. Old wounds. Old anger. Old grief. By the time the plane landed, my stomach was in knots. The next day, I drove through familiar streets. Past familiar stores. Past familiar neighborhoods. Past pieces of a life I'd abandoned. Everything looked smaller than I remembered. Except the fear. The fear felt enormous. That evening, I sat alone in a hotel room, the folder resting on the desk beside me. I stared at it for nearly an hour, thinking, remembering, preparing. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Inside, my pulse refused to slow down. Tomorrow, I'd see my father. Tomorrow, I'd see Vanessa. Tomorrow, everything would change, one way or another, because hidden inside that folder was a truth powerful enough to destroy 12 years of lies. The only question left was this: would my family finally be willing to see it? Or would they choose Vanessa one last time? And as I sat there in the darkness, waiting for morning, I honestly didn't know which answer scared me more. The morning of my father's birthday arrived gray and humid. I barely slept. Maybe 2 hours? 3 at most. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined a different outcome. In one version, nobody believed me. In another, Vanessa talked her way out of everything. In another, Dad looked me in the eye and chose her again. That was the one that frightened me most. Not because it would surprise me, because it wouldn't. And after 12 years, I wasn't sure I could survive hearing it one more time. I stood in front of the hotel mirror adjusting my jacket. The black folder sat on the dresser, waiting. Simple. Ordinary. A cheap office folder from a supply store. Nothing about it suggested it contained enough evidence to detonate an entire family, but it did. I picked it up. For a moment, I just stared at it. 12 years. 12 years of accusations. 12 years of humiliation. 12 years of being treated like a problem. all compressed into a few hundred pages. Then I took a deep breath and left. The party was being held at my father's house, the same house, the same driveway, the same front porch. Walking up those steps felt like stepping backward through time. Memories hit me from every direction: Christmas decorations, summer barbecues, arguments, laughter, loss, pain. The house contained pieces of every version of me: the little girl who lost her mother, the teenager who lost her father, the young woman who eventually lost the entire family. I stood outside for several seconds before ringing the bell. Then it opened, and there she was, Vanessa, 56 years old. Perfect makeup, perfect smile, perfect posture, perfect image, the queen of appearances. For half a second, genuine surprise flashed across her face. Then it disappeared, replaced instantly by warmth. Artificial warmth. The kind she'd spent decades perfecting. Olivia. Her smile widened. Oh my goodness. She hugged me before I could react. The performance had started. I wasn't sure you'd come. I forced a smile. Happy birthday to Dad? Her eyes studied me briefly, assessing, calculating. Something about her expression told me she felt uneasy. Maybe intuition, maybe guilt. Maybe she simply recognized confidence where she'd once expected weakness. Whatever it was, she noticed something different. And it bothered her. Good. The house was crowded. Nearly 40 people, family members, friends, neighbors, people I hadn't seen in years. Conversations filled every room. The smell of catered food drifted through the house. Music played quietly in the background. Everyone looked happy, normal, comfortable. And for a brief moment, I almost questioned myself. Almost. Then I saw Dad, standing near the dining room, laughing with relatives. Older, grayer, smaller somehow. Age had softened him. The sight hurt more than I expected, because despite everything, I still loved him. Part of me probably always would. He saw me. His smile faded, then returned. Uncertain, careful. Like he wasn't sure how to approach me anymore. That realization stung. We hugged awkwardly, neither of us knowing what to say. Neither of us knowing how to bridge a decade of damage. Eventually he stepped back. It's good to see you. I nodded. You too. A simple exchange, yet it felt heavier than entire conversations, because beneath those 4 words sat years of things neither of us knew how to discuss. For the next hour, I waited, watched, observed. I didn't come to start a scene. I came to tell the truth. And timing mattered. Meanwhile, Vanessa moved through the crowd like royalty, greeting guests, accepting compliments, managing conversations. Everyone adored her, exactly as she'd planned, exactly as she'd always planned. The sight should have made me angry. Instead, it made me calm, strangely calm, because for the first time, I knew something they didn't. For the first time, I wasn't trapped. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't defending myself. I was holding the receipts. Literally. The longer I watched her, the more relaxed I became, because I finally understood something. People like Vanessa survive because they control information, not because they're smarter, not because they're stronger. Because nobody compares notes, nobody checks facts, nobody looks behind the curtain. Today, the curtain was coming down. The opportunity arrived after dinner. Dad stood to give a speech. Everyone gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, smiles everywhere. The atmosphere felt warm, celebratory, safe. Dad thanked everyone for coming, thanked his friends, thanked relatives. Then he thanked Vanessa. Of course he did. The room applauded. Vanessa smiled modestly, the devoted wife, the loving stepmother, the family hero. I watched the applause, and realized something important. This was the last time they would ever see her this way. When the applause ended, I stood. Immediately, several heads turned. I could feel my heartbeat. Slow, steady, surprisingly steady. Actually, I said, I'd like to say something too. The room quieted. Vanessa's smile tightened, only slightly. Most people missed it. I didn't. Dad looked confused. Olivia? I nodded. I won't take long. A lie. It would take exactly as long as necessary. I stepped forward, holding the black folder. Suddenly the room felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Conversations disappeared completely. Everyone was watching, waiting, curious. Then I looked directly at Vanessa and said the words I'd waited 12 years to say. I spent most of my life believing there was something wrong with me. The room became silent, the kind of silence that hums. I believed I was difficult. I looked around. I believed I was selfish. Another pause. I believed I was the reason my family fell apart. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Vanessa's face remained composed, but her eyes had changed. She knew. Not everything, but enough. She knew danger had arrived. I continued. For years, I was told I was a liar. My voice stayed calm, controlled. I was accused of stealing. A few relatives exchanged glances. I was accused of manipulating people. More glances. I was accused of causing conflict. Now the room felt genuinely uncomfortable. Good. Truth often is. Then I lifted the folder. And eventually I discovered something. Vanessa finally spoke, softly, carefully. Olivia. I ignored her. I discovered that every accusation came from the same person. Her face drained slightly. Just slightly. Enough. The first crack. Then everything happened very quickly. I began distributing copies. Prepared copies. Organized copies. Color-coded copies. Months of preparation. Months of evidence. Months of verification. One by one, documents moved through the room. People started reading. At first, confusion, then concentration, then concern, then shock. Actual shock. The atmosphere changed so fast it felt physical, like a temperature drop before a storm. Someone flipped through emails. Another reviewed financial records. Someone else examined timelines. The room became increasingly quiet. Vanessa attempted to speak. These documents are being misrepresented. Nobody listened. For the first time in her life, nobody listened. Because paper doesn't get intimidated. Evidence doesn't get manipulated. Facts don't care about charm. The realization hit her visibly. She began talking faster, explaining, deflecting, reframing, years of habits activating simultaneously. But something fascinating happened. The tactics stopped working. People were comparing notes, cross-referencing stories, asking questions, real questions, questions she'd spent years preventing. I watched family members slowly connect dots, arguments from years ago, broken friendships, financial confusion, missing money, rumors, misunderstandings. Suddenly, everything had a common denominator: Vanessa. Always Vanessa. The room transformed into a giant realization, and she could feel it. Then came the moment I'll never forget. Dad sat silently reviewing documents, page after page, email after email, record after record. His hands shook. Not dramatically. Just enough. Enough for me to notice. Enough to break my heart. Because I wasn't watching a man discover his wife lied. I was watching a man discover he'd lost 12 years. 12 years he could never get back. Eventually he looked up, directly at Vanessa, and asked a single question. One question. Quiet. Simple. Devastating. Is any of this false? Not. Did you do this? Not. How could you? Just. Is any of this false? The question mattered because it forced one thing: a direct answer. No storytelling, no emotional manipulation, no redirection. A direct answer. Vanessa opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. For the first time since I'd known her, she had nowhere to go. The silence lasted maybe 5 seconds. It felt like 5 years. Finally, she whispered, "It's more complicated than that." The room collectively deflated, because everyone understood what that answer meant. Everyone, including Dad. What followed wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no thrown objects, no cinematic meltdown. Reality is usually quieter, more painful, more human. People simply stopped believing her, one by one, conversation by conversation. The illusion dissolved. And once illusions break, they rarely reform. Relatives started sharing experiences. Stories emerged, then more stories, then more. People compared memories, compared timelines, compared contradictions. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Vanessa had spent years playing family members against one another. And now everyone was finally seeing the same picture. The truth. The whole truth. Not fragments. Not rumors. Truth. The thing she'd spent years suppressing. The thing she'd underestimated. The thing she'd assumed would never catch up to her. Eventually, Vanessa left the room. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed her. That part struck me hardest. For years, she'd controlled everyone. Now she walked away alone. Not because people hated her, because they no longer trusted her. Trust. That's the real currency of relationships. And hers was bankrupt. Completely bankrupt. Dad remained seated, staring at the documents, staring at years of evidence, staring at consequences. The room gradually emptied. Conversations moved elsewhere. People needed space, time, distance, processing. Eventually, only a handful of us remained. Dad, me, a few relatives, and the silence, a heavy silence. Then Dad looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in over a decade, his eyes were red, exhausted, broken, and he asked, "How long have you known?" I swallowed. "A year." He nodded slowly. Then came the question I never expected. The question I'd dreamed about for years. The question that hurt far more than it healed. Why didn't I see it? I didn't answer immediately, because there wasn't one answer. There were hundreds. Grief, loneliness, love, fear, denial, manipulation, human weakness, all tangled together. Finally, I said, "Because you trusted the wrong person." The pain on his face was unbearable, because he knew it was true. Over the following months, everything changed. Not instantly, not perfectly. Real life isn't that neat. Relationships don't magically repair themselves. Trust doesn't regenerate overnight. But things changed. Family members reached out, apologized. Some cried. Some struggled to find words. Some admitted they'd doubted me privately for years. Others admitted they'd believed every lie. Those conversations were difficult, painful, necessary. As for Vanessa, the consequences unfolded gradually. Her reputation collapsed. Not publicly, not online, not dramatically, just socially, personally, completely. People stopped calling, stopped confiding, stopped trusting. The image she'd spent decades building disappeared, because once someone learns you've manipulated them, every memory becomes suspicious. Every interaction gets reevaluated. Every story gets re-examined. And eventually, credibility dies. My father filed for divorce 11 months later. When I heard the news, I felt nothing. At least initially. No celebration, no excitement, no triumph, just quiet. Because by then I'd realized something. The revenge was never the divorce. It wasn't the exposure. It wasn't even the humiliation. The revenge happened the moment people finally saw me clearly. That's what I'd wanted all along. Not vengeance, validation, the truth, the chance to stop carrying someone else's lies. And I finally had it. A few years have passed since that birthday party. My relationship with my father is better now. Not perfect. It will probably never be perfect. There are years we can't recover. Memories we can't replace. Damage we can't undo. But we're trying. And sometimes trying is enough. The black folder still exists. It's stored in a box in my closet. I haven't opened it in years. I don't need to, because its job is finished. The evidence gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. My voice. For 12 years, someone else controlled the story. Then one day, the truth got its turn. And it turned out the truth didn't need to shout. It only needed proof. The strangest part? People often ask whether exposing Vanessa felt good. The answer is complicated. Watching her reputation collapse wasn't satisfying. Watching the lies collapse was. There's a difference. One is revenge. The other is justice. And after 12 years of being treated like the villain, justice was enough. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for listening. And let me know in the comments. If someone spent years turning your family against you, would you have exposed them the same way Olivia did? Or would you have walked away and never looked back? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more revenge stories where the truth eventually catches up with the people who thought they'd never face consequences. And remember, a lie can travel for years, but when the truth finally arrives, it doesn't need to run. It just needs to be believed.